Good afternoon, college football fans. Thank you for tuning into our Week 3 crossover episode with your Huskies hosting the Arizona Wildcats with your host at Jacob Minuti and myself at 9 3/4. Today we're going to be diving into the quarterbacks, some discussions about the running backs and run defense, as well as a whole lot of other non-personnel related issues. As a reminder, please feel free to drop a comment or even just a hello, and we'll make sure we cover those, as well as our segments and anything else that comes up in chat. Thank you. Now then, Jacob, quarterback quandaries and quarrels and mishaps and issues and last week's performance. How did you guys feel coming out of last week with your guys' quarterback?
I mean, I was honestly pretty optimistic. I think, Gunnell did a really good job last week. I thought he, played a really good game. He threw that interception on the very first drive. He completely missed Jamari Joyner on that in route. That would have been the first down, but, he airmailed it and it found a USC defender, and then they scored like a minute later. But I don't know. Honestly, other than that, I thought he settled in really well and really played a good game. He was going through his reads, he was progressing through them and utilizing the checkdowns and the flats. And, it was just awesome to see how, efficient that offense actually really was, especially compared to last year. We were seeing that offense, either if the first read wasn't open, they were just bombing it 30, 40 yards down the field and hoping somebody was going to catch it. Like that offense just was not the same as it is this year. And so last week, just watching that offense really, utilizing the checkdowns and going through the reads. And, that one play where Jamari Joyner caught that touchdown, that was a little 5-yard drag route that he took 30 yards into the end zone. Like that play wasn't intended for Jamari Joyner. He was like the third read in that play. And, he just dumped it off into the flats and, gave the ball to his playmakers to make a play. So I thought he did really well last week, and I'm expecting the same thing this weekend.
I mean, yeah, looking at his stats here, the 24 for 36, 286 yards, like you said, one interception, but I mean, that's easily outweighed by the 3 touchdowns he threw. I couldn't help, but I don't know how much you've been watching Dylan Morris, our redshirt freshman quarterback, but I've been drawing some really interesting parallels. I mean, you see it 24 for 36 with Gunnell, 14 for 24 with Morris, obviously his first game in college, and it's to be expected to be a little low. 286 yards to 141. I mean, 0 TDs, 0 interceptions for Morris. But the rushing is looking really similar. I mean, 3.1 yard average attempts for Gunnell, 5.3. But again, he only had 4 attempts for Morris, so that number's a little inflated. But I can't help but feeling that Morris might be a younger, perhaps a higher skill ceiling version of Gunnell. With that being said, I think the same issues are kind of at stake here, where sometimes you get those airy balls. We saw that last week with the Huskies with Morris. I mean, again, his first game, but I mean, some of those balls were spot on. And then others were like, why did you throw it there? I mean, like a kid who's been playing, who maybe doesn't watch football at all, could have accurately put that a little better. How do you feel with accuracy and kind of this, with a 7-game season approaching mid-season? How do you feel about that kind of mid-season form with Gunnell versus Morris heading into this your guys' away game this weekend?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it will be a little bit biased here, but I think Gunnell kind of has the edge on Dylan Morris just because we've seen Gunnell last year, and he's proven that he can run the offense. I think he threw 9 touchdowns to 1 interception last year. So I mean, he proved that he can not only run the offense but limit turnovers as well. Only throwing 1 pick that whole season last year. In limited playing time, of course. I think he only played 5 or 6 games. He didn't play the whole season, but you get my point. I mean, he proved to us last year that he can run this offense, and I don't think we've really seen a whole lot of Dylan Morris. And he didn't really have to do a whole lot last week just because, that run game was so efficient. So, I don't know. I think if you're comparing the two and you want to see, who, has the edge right now, I think you have to give it to Gunnell. But, I wouldn't sleep on Dylan Morris too. I mean, he had a couple of rushing attempts. They looked solid with scrambling. But in terms of just throwing the ball, we haven't really seen him do that yet. And, in his first season, of course, and, just that first game, anything. So I don't know. I think the jury's still out on Dylan Morris, but I think he's got some upside for sure.
Yeah, biased or not, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, Morris just hasn't played enough for anyone to make a reasonable or even educated opinion on him, I feel like. One thing I would be worried about as an Arizona fan is the speed at which your offense gets to a start, and how a lot of that I feel like is run by a quarterback and setting tempo. And your guys' I mean, obviously both teams having a terrible first drive in our games last week, but how do you feel like that's been addressed in press conferences with your coaches and talks with the quarterback or anything on the team at all, in terms of like picking up tempo and getting drives started sooner rather than waiting through? I mean, when I was watching, I'd say halfway through the second drive, maybe started the third, you guys started looking like you were getting in your groove. Like, Have you seen anything or heard anything about that getting fixed up or picked up on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just tough because last week was Arizona's first game, and it was the same for Washington. But I mean, I think it's always kind of hard for a new offense to kind of get going right away. I mean, new quarterback, new starting running back, a bunch of new wide receivers, and it not I guess kind of a new scheme as well because Khalil Tate and the plays that they used to call for him are almost exactly opposite of what they were trying to call for Gunnell. So last year it was a lot of RPOs. It was a lot of deep balls, a lot of run plays for Tate. We don't see that anymore with Gunnell. So it was an entirely new offense for the most part. I would say a lot of new personnel. So I can't really fault them for getting off to a slow start. And they still ended up putting 30 points up on the board at the end of the game. So I thought the offense looked really good last week. So although it kind of started off slow and it took a drive or two to get going, I don't know. I'm still really optimistic about this offensive group. I think they got a lot of really good talent on that side of the ball. I think the scheme that they're trying to run now with just a high tempo, taking the yards that are given to them, not necessarily chucking the ball 20, 30 yards down the field every play. A lot of 4-yard, 5-yard dump routes, a couple of run plays in there. I like the momentum and kind of the groove that the offense has, and I'm still pretty optimistic. But yeah, I mean, you obviously want to get going early. That's especially with a struggling defense. You never want to have your defense go out there on the first drive and they're already down 7-0, right? Or like you want to give them a lead when the defense comes back out there. So obviously you want them to kind of start the game off right. But I mean, as long as you're still putting up 30 plus points, I think Arizona has a good chance of winning any game when an offense scores 30 points, regardless of when they start to actually start scoring the points.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about wanting to have your defense like have the lead as they start their defensive drives and stuff. And I mean, you guys have great receivers and people with like phenomenal receptions from last week. Last week, Barry Hill, Cunningham, Brightwell, Joyner had some really good receptions as well, like you said. Heading into this week against UW's secondary, what's been touted, I think, around the league, I think I'd be safe with saying that we might have the best secondary, if not second best secondary in the league right now. How do you feel that shift coming out of the game against USC, where maybe it might be a weaker team, and I think we might be a little weaker than USC right now, but having such a much stronger secondary? Do you see that game plan changing? What do you expect the coaches to make in terms of decisions with the QBs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be interested to see who Trent McDuffie ends up lining up against because I think whoever's going to be on him is pretty much going to lock that wide receiver down. He's a great corner. We saw Booby Curry kind of get shut down by Chris Steele pretty much the whole game last week. So, I think, depending on what kind of scheme that they decide to run, whether or not they play sides. I don't know if, Washington's defense plays sides on corners or if they man guys up. But I don't know. We'll see. But I think Arizona's got a lot of different weapons. We saw Booby Curry pretty much get shut out of the game, and there were still other guys to pick up the slack. Jamari Joyner was still making plays. Tavion Cunningham had that big catch. Stanley Berryhill, and they're getting Brian Castile back this week as well. So that's a really deep wide receiver core. So yeah, that's a good secondary. I agree. They've always had a good secondary. I feel like it's DBU over there at Washington. But, I don't know. I'm confident in Arizona's wide receiver core. I think there's a lot of them, too, where if one of them gets shut out, there's going to be 2, 3, 4 other guys that are going to pick up the slack. But that's definitely going to be an interesting matchup. But I'll be watching for Trent McDuffie and seeing where he lines up.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about matchups, one of the other big ones that's going to be a talk about, especially coming out of last week, was the whole like UW run game versus Arizona's linebacker core defensive line. And I think this was the segment I had the absolute most fun going into and kind of picking apart because, I mean, like looking at your guys' pass defense last week, 30 for 43 on USC's quarterback, 325 yards, 1 TD. I mean, I was surprised when I saw 325 yards and 1 TD. But the one thing that tells me is either that 1 TD passing drive came out of a short range play somewhere close to the 5-10 yard line, where it was like a deep ball, just missed tackle or like a broken play, something like that. The other side of that, what that tells me is that your guys' run defense is not leaving anything really to be desired where we stand. I mean, your guys' D line had 13 or 14 scholarship returners coming out of last year. But then the problem, much like our team, comes with that inside linebacker core. With all of those defensive changes that those stats like absolutely were calling for coming out of your 2019 season, and Sumlin's coaching exodus and mass firings and replacements and whatnot, how do you feel that that's been setting up your team's run defense? I mean, you guys have only had one game like us, but have you seen improvements already coming? I mean, I'd honestly say you guys have found improvements, but tell me a little bit more about what you guys are seeing down there in Arizona.
Yeah, I mean it's tough because it's only been one game, and I thought Arizona did a pretty solid job with the run game last week. I know the stats don't really show it. I think they gave up 170 something yards rushing, which isn't very good, but a lot of those chunks of the yards came in the second half. After Arizona had a couple injuries and it screwed up the personnel a lot. Kevin Sumlin even alluded to that in the press conference on Monday following the game. He was saying, on that final drive where they gave up the go-ahead touchdown. He said he didn't have the guys out there he wanted because of the injuries. Jackson Turner got hurt in the third quarter. He was having a great game. I think he had 8 tackles before he ended up getting hurt. So I think the personnel in the second half kind of got depleted. But if everyone's healthy, I thought they did a pretty solid job. But like it's hard to kind of compare because USC's run offense is nowhere near the same as Washington's run offense. Like they run an air raid over there, so it's basically their only run plays are inside zones, right? So there's not really a whole lot to it, as compared to Washington. They're under center pretty much every down, and they've got 2 tight ends out there and play actions and strong I form. 3 tight ends. Like they're committed to this run game, so it's totally different. So to say that they had a pretty solid job against USC. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have success against Washington's run offense because they're 2 completely different things. But I think if everyone's healthy, I'm a little bit confident in Arizona's run defense. But the problem is just the depth. Like half the linebacking core is walk-ons. So it's one injury there, and you got a walk-on out there. Another injury, now you got 2 walk-ons out there. And on that final drive, we had a handful of walk-ons out there on that final drive. So it's just kind of tough. I think this team has a couple of really good players, but if that, they start to get depleted and one guy gets hurt, I think that's when they start to get in trouble because Arizona, I think, only has like 7 or 8 linebackers on the roster and half of them are walk-ons. So the depth is certainly not there, but I thought they did an all right job. I really liked what I saw from Aaron Blackwell and Roy Lopez last week, the 2 interior nose tackles. I think they did a good job with the run defense. No sacks, though. We didn't see any. We had a couple of QB pressures I saw, but no real sacks. So that's kind of another thing that worries me is that, there was no sort of, elite pass rush that we saw last week. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, normally this is the point after I'm not even going to say it, like you weren't defending their offense or defense or attacking it anyway, but this is the point normally where I feel like I should be smack talking about our run game. But to be completely honest, like when fans just have zero clue what our head coach is putting in for next week, like it's really hard to talk smack. Like, I don't know if we're going to be running and rushing and putting that forward. And like we utilized 9 rushers over 49 attempts for almost 270 yards ish last week. I think personally that was because it was Morris's first game. It was super rainy. I mean, like you guys have heard of Seattle. I'm from Seattle. I know how terrible the weather here can be. And the rain's like no joke when you're trying to catch a football. So like, again, normally this is where I talk smack, but not knowing what our coach wants to do tomorrow when we play you guys makes it really hard because I could talk for 20, 30 minutes, the whole episode about our run game and Pleasance and all of our guys. And then I just don't want to do that if Lake is going to come up on Saturday and rush 5 times over the full course of the game. Like what am I supposed to do there?
I don't think he'll do that. I don't know if you saw his press conference, but he was wearing that hat that said "run the damn ball," and he was talking about he's never going to be an air raid. So I think they want to run the ball, but yeah, you never know. He was talking about he wanted to stay versatile or whatever. But yeah, you're totally right. It's always kind of tough to talk about a game, but you have no idea what's actually going to come out of it.
Yeah, I think the funniest part about that too, though, is coming out of the Chris Peterson era where like he's almost known for his air raid and he's almost known for like the amount of trick plays he'll throw at other teams. And so seeing him wear that hat and like talk nonstop about run game, I'm like, okay, yeah, he's gonna run it like 2 times next week. Like that's what he's setting up. He wanted us to be a surprise around the league or something crazy like that. That being said, though, with a team that, I mean, honestly, we don't really know what they're up to as it's the first year with Lake, a new OC and everything, is how do you guys expect to be able to shift and develop a game plan against the team that I don't even know what we're going to be doing?
Yeah, it's certainly tough, but I don't know. I think you have to go into this mindset of stopping the run game because I think Arizona's key to winning this game is if they shut down the run game. I think they got a real good shot at this one. Force Dylan Morris to throw the ball. as much times as possible. Whether he's experienced or not, really prove to us. Like if Arizona loses this game because Dylan Morris just goes off and throws for 400 yards, so be it, right? But if Arizona loses this game because they just got the ball ran all over them and they gave up 200 plus rushing yards, that's not that's a bad loss. Like you can accept an inexperienced quarterback just like going off against you, like, oh yeah, he beat us, but when you're going into this game with somewhat of an expectation of they're going to run the ball, that has to be emphasis number one, is stopping the run game, because then you force them to be force them to be more one-dimensional and not so much because if their run game gets going, who knows what they're going to do, because now they can run play action, they can keep running the ball, they can pass it, they can do whatever they want with a good run game. So if you take away that element, I think Arizona has a good shot at this one. I think that has to be the game plan going into this week, is stop the run game. That's going to be the key.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who watches football long enough knows that like the passing game absolutely gets started in the trenches, where you start stretching defenses out, bringing them together, stretching them out again with passes down deep. And I'm super excited that we have 9 rushers that we can utilize pretty effectively in our backfield, or not backfield. Some of them came off the sweep, so like I'll be completely fair with that. But heading into, I mean, it's tough to debate things like this. I mean, we haven't really been debating at all. I've just been kind of throwing questions at you because I can't stop drawing parallels between our two teams. Like D-line had some hits, but still has a bunch of people behind who are like absolutely phenomenal, maybe not starters last year. We have inside linebacker cores who were absolutely gutted by departures. We have secondaries who are still pretty same from last year. We have quarterbacks who aren't super proven, but have done a little bit of work. And so it's really hard to compare when you're just like, yeah, we're comparing apples to apples here. I mean, it's an apple and it's an apple. What do you want me to say?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
But heading into this week, one thing that I'm a little worried about is your D-line. Like, I think that's one of the strongest things you guys have on your defense right now with, like I said, the 13 scholarship return. I mean, that's insane for me to think about. But I know your guys' defensive coordinator, Paul Rhodes, I think his name is. He wanted to come in with the 3-4 defense this year, but with such a low amount of linebackers to pull from for that. Like, what have you guys been doing to change that? And what was your biggest, I guess, kind of change around that defensive scheme heading into USC? And what do you think we're going to see this week coming into Husky Stadium at Montlake?
Well, they were actually running a 3-4 despite such little linebackers. They had Rourke Freeberg, a walkout rotating in through there, but they were committed to the 3-4, and I thought it was interesting because I didn't think there was any way that they can run a 3-4 with the amount of linebackers that they have, so little linebackers that they have. But we saw as soon as an injury or two happened, they had to switch up the scheme to that stupid 3-3-5 defense, which I just hate. That was the killer on that final drive, was that stupid 3-3-5 defensive shell. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, Arizona has a lot of experienced D linemen within that position group, but I wouldn't say any of them are elite pass rushers. Like, there's no threat on that D line to get a sack, and it wasn't last week, and it wasn't. I think Arizona was like dead last in Power 5 in terms of like sacks last year. Like, there was no sort of sacks and just any sort of QB pressure being put on by that D line. So I think it got a lot better in the offseason with, the grad transfers of Aaron Blackmore and Roy Lopez. But in terms of pass rushing, I'm not expecting anything out of that. I think this game's going to be won in the trenches. If you stop the run game, who cares if you don't have a sack? At least you held Washington, to 100 yards rushing at least, right? So I don't know. It's so hard to kind of say what kind of scheme they're going to run just because, they don't have a lot of depth. So it's going to be a lot of, let's go in with this one mindset, and as soon as something happens, they're going to have to switch it up. And we saw that week 1, and it'll probably happen again this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I'm looking forward to, honestly, heading into this next week, is that we don't I don't feel like we necessarily have. I mean, I know I just said that you need the run game to set up a pass game, but I'm confident enough in what Morris has presented us in this first week and what the coaches and other players say of him during fall camp, what he presented in high school, that I personally think that if we have to throw, Morris is going to be able to show up and make those passes. I'm just praying that down in Arizona it doesn't rain as much. I mean, I'm pretty sure it doesn't rain as much as it does up here in Seattle. So not
360 days of sunny weather in Arizona.
I think it's the complete opposite of that here in Seattle. But heading into our last segment, which is really about the weather too, and all those intangibles you can't get around. I mean, there's things like travel time, and this is the furthest you guys travel all season. You guys haven't been up to Montlake since 2015, and I think it's been 2007 since you guys have won against UW. Do you think your team's mentally prepared to play the Huskies, whether or not we're a better or worse team?
Yeah, I actually think they sound pretty ready, at least from what they said at the press conferences. I mean, it's so crazy because I think it's supposed to rain every day for the next 2 weeks in Seattle, but the forecast on Saturday does not predict any sort of rain. So I don't know if the football gods are watching over us this weekend, but whatever it is. But yeah, it sounds like they're ready. That was a lot of the questions that were popping up in these media sessions. It was a lot of this is going to be you're going to be facing rainy weather. How are you going to prepare for this? And Kevin Sumlin said that they've been doing wet ball drills throughout the week, just kind of getting a feel for what it's going to be like if, they have the ball and, it's going to be a rainy night. And Lucas Haversick has said that he's kicked the ball around a few times doing the wet ball drills because, the ball is a little bit heavier when it's wet. So, they're not ignoring thing. Like, this is not something that, it's just like, oh, it might rain. Oh, well, what are we going to do about it? Like, they're planning for it. Like, they're ready for this game to be a rainy game. But I mean, that's only half the battle, right? Like, you can simulate rain games, however you want. You can wet the ball, you can dunk it in a bucket of water as much as you want, but it's just not the same as being in that atmosphere and the rain is actually coming down on you and, it's making the entire grass wet and everything. Like, it's a totally different feel. So it sounds like they're ready for it, but, it's never the same in practice as it is in a game. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, having played sports in Seattle my entire life. Like, rain during a game is something else. Like, you just can't practice for it, like you said. One thing I'm super worried about, at least on my end, is that your guys' receiving core in terms of injuries looks like it's a lot healthier than what UW's is looking like. And I couldn't find any other positions. I mean, other than the inside linebacker core, which I think might be worse off than our receivers right now, just because of all of those departures. But I mean, I couldn't really see a position group at all from our team to yours where we had a crazy big lead in terms of talent or personnel or depth. And the only thing that I can really pray for is a lack of injuries, which I think is super hard to get around when you're planning for games. How much, I know you guys have had a couple injuries. Like, how much has that hindered your guys' team last week? Do you think it's going to do much for you guys this week?
Well, I mean, on defense, it certainly hurt. We had a couple injuries last week in the middle of the game that kind of just screwed up the whole defensive scheme. But otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of guys. Like, they're pretty much 5-6 deep at every single position. Like, Arizona had 4 or 5 different receivers that they could have rotated through last week, and that was without 2 of their receivers. So now they're both going to be back. Brian Castillo's coming back. Like, Brian Castillo started last year for Arizona, so he's going to be thrown right into the mix. And they've got a lot of options at wide receiver. I think that running back depth as well was a little bit depleted now with a couple of injuries to Frank Brown and Bam Smith at the beginning of the season. But that's still a really strong and deep running back core as well. And we only saw 2 running backs from that group last week just because Gary Brightwell was running the ball so much and he was doing such a good job at it. So, if Gary Brightwell has an off day, they can give it to Michael Wiley. They can give it to Nathan Tilford, who's been here for 3 years. Jalen John's coming in as a freshman, but he's huge. Like, he's just built to be a good running back. So they got a lot of options. And, that entire offensive line is, returning. And, they've got a lot of big dudes on that line too, which I know has a lot of big offensive linemen too. I mean, I was talking with a beat reporter earlier in the week who covers Washington, and he was saying that, half the reason why that run game was so good last week was because of Washington's offensive line. They were running it to one side of the ball. So, I mean, can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I'm not too familiar with their offensive line, but everything that I've heard is that you guys got a couple of big boys there.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fan of linemen, and especially the O-line. I mean, I was a running back in high school for most of it. And so, being in the trenches and, giving respect to those offensive linemen, I think is, absolutely number one on my list when talking about football. And I'm 99.99% sure that this offensive line starting group we have is the heaviest we've had on average since UW started playing football however many years ago. I think we've capped out about an average of 230 pounds across the – or 320 pounds, across the O-line on average, which is absolutely insane. I mean, 230, sure. I'm sitting here 205. 230 is a lot. I was there 4 months ago. But 320, that's insane. I mean, there's problems that have been plaguing our own line from our center being center leaving from last year to this year and throwing a younger guy who hasn't had much practice there. I mean, our long snapper was absolutely abysmal last week. But a lot of it comes down to our left tackle. I forget his name right now, so shame on me. I got to look that up and tweet about it later. But it really comes down to our left tackle. He was a huge presence on the line last year, given his grade level. Like, it's insane. I remember all these things about him, but not his last name. He was just working and practicing. He was getting groomed for all these positions, and like he was absolutely like being set up to be the next leader. And now I want to say his name's Jackson Kirkland. I hope that's right.
That sounds right, actually. Yeah.
But like he's sitting there at left tackle and just dominating at the position when we played last week against Oregon State. And so that was absolutely good news for us. Like seeing that, especially on a rainy weather game like that, and having a quarterback who's starting and playing in their first college game ever, being able to have that O-line step up, take leadership, and just dominate there. Or I'm not gonna stretch it to dominate, but like exceed expectations with how many departures we had is phenomenal. It's something optimistic. It's something good to look forward to heading against you guys next week. And that's one of the biggest matchups I think I'm going to be watching. Is like I'm going to ignore the balls. I want to see how our O-line does against what I think is a pretty stacked defensive line. And I think that's going to be one of the key matchups heading into tomorrow night.
Oh, this game's going to be one in the trenches, 100%. You know, and going back to what you said, 270 rushing yards. I think you guys dominated. I think it's safe to say you dominated that game. But yeah, this game's totally going to be one in the trenches. Whether it's going to be Arizona's offensive line stepping up, or whether it's going to be UW's offensive line stepping up. But however this game is going to be won, we're going to look back at the stat sheet and we're going to see it was won in the trenches. How many tackles for loss did the other defensive line have? How many rushing yards did they have? It's going to be won in the trenches. There's a lot of options and a lot of weapons that Arizona has, but it's going to come down to the trenches. So that's definitely going to be the matchup to watch. And it'll be interesting to see because, Arizona actually has a lot of big body dudes. Like that was not something that we were able to say as of a couple of years ago. They were dudes 240, 250 pounds on the defensive line. They were just getting tossed around. Like it was terrible to watch. But, now there's some real big dudes, 290, 300 pound plus dudes that are going out there and actually playing the defensive line position. So that it's going to be a war in the trenches. That's certainly something that I'm going to be watching for.
Yeah, two other things to just kind of keep under the radar, especially for people watching this episode right now, is that there's two things that don't really play into many games that are going to be playing into tomorrow night's battle, and that's crowd noise. I mean, obviously everyone in Pac-12 knows like Montlake is pretty well known. UW's pretty well known for their fan base and how loud we can get during games. No fans tomorrow night. So that's going to be a big plus for you. But something I think that's going to offset that, and you can tell me how you feel about it, is travel time. You guys don't travel up this far north very often or this far away from your school very often. And I know we're at a level of play where travel time and like being rested and having that distance of lag isn't a big factor. But again, tell me how you feel about the travel time, the distance, the crowd noise, and how all that you think is going to play into Arizona's game plan.
Well, yeah, traveling is something I don't think anybody really thinks about, but it's a big deal. They left today, and they have to, especially in this year with, all of the COVID tests and all of the protocols and regulations they got to go to. So I would even argue it's even harder right now to travel that far, because they have to do all these regulations and all these COVID tests. But, it sounds like they're good to go. But yeah, totally. This is their first road game. They were supposed to travel to Salt Lake City in week 1, but obviously that didn't happen. So these dudes have been in Tucson for several months now. So this is their first time really getting out of the Arizona, just getting out of the Tucson area, let alone Arizona. So it's definitely something that nobody really talks about. But I think, traveling that far up north and, the weather is going to be crappy. It's definitely something that nobody wants to talk about, but it'll definitely come into play because they're going to be flying in and it's going to be rainy. So as soon as you get there, you're already in the Seattle atmosphere of this weather is so weird. Like, as soon as you land, you're in the atmosphere. So it's There's not a whole lot of time to really get going. So it's not something that people talk about, but it'll certainly be a factor this weekend.
Yeah, one thing people really don't realize, especially when they haven't visited or been to Washington very much, especially the Seattle area, is how cold it can get during the day. I mean, 3 days ago, I was in my car driving somewhere and was absolutely thrown aback when I looked at my freaking thermometer in my dashboard and it said 42 degrees at 2 p.m. It's November, like barely that at this point. Like, why is it this cold? And so one thing I'm going to be hoping for, because I want to see a good game, is that none of your guys get injured from that drastic delta change from super hot weather to super cold weather. I'm going to be praying for all of you guys to be stretching, to be healthy, to have that great battle without injuries, because again, that's one of the things you can't really control in football, and that is always so painful for both teams to see, is when injuries happen on the field. But thanks, Jacob, for coming on. I think that just about finishes up the time that we all have for tonight. Once again, I'm Joseph, and this is Jacob Menuda. You can follow us on our different social medias with the ads that you see on screen right now. Again, we're just a small part of the Dash Sports family. So if you'd like to meet the rest of our crew, including our producer behind the scenes tonight, please absolutely go to our website and check all of these guys out. They're absolutely amazing. We all make amazing content, and a lot of passion and effort goes into this work for you guys. Please also check out our partner, sportspack12.com, where you can also read further into segments from our weekly shows. If you'd like to revisit the best moments from today's episode, head over to our website where you can find clips, quips, tips, rips, terrible jokes, and as many full episodes as you guys can stand, all for free, all in one place, Dash Sports TV. We'll see you next time, but for now, this is Dash Sports signing off. Have a great night.